there as we head into week 7, but which are the ones that you can trust? There's nothing more trustworthy than the SPAGS rankings, of course, where we try to decipher who are the superior players, who's in a great spot, and who is just mid. Of course, using our proprietary SPAGS ranking, which you can see here on the screen for the QBs. Let's kick it off with these guys here. Of course, Jalen Hurts going to be number 1 on the board. What we look at for the SPAGS rankings here, of course, a proprietary stat that I've created that we'll call the SPAGS score moving forward. Basically, what that encompasses is the guy's volume, how much a QB is throwing downfield, how much a QB is running, their overall level of dropbacks, as well as how efficient they are in terms of the expected points added metric, of course, that I swear by from Sports Info Solutions. So we're going to talk about here today. And Jalen Hurts here with that 63.7, a number that functionally means nothing, but does show that he's the apex predator at the QB position, is going to put him at number 1. You can see 10.5 rush attempts per game, 5.3 deep throws every game here for Jalen Hurts. Of course, 20+ air yard throws is what I'm looking at. The issue for Hurts is one that's still been going on all year and then definitely reared its head this past weekend in a loss to the Jets. He's been a negative EPA passer per pass, negative 0.05 EPA per pass, 0.02 positive EPA per dropback. So when he's just getting the ability to do whatever he wants on a dropback, he's performing a little bit better. Obviously, the run game for Jalen Hurts always something that's going to help him out a little bit, but the pass game for him, not quite as efficient. Catchable ball rate for him, not the best this year either, 75.6%, which would put him behind guys like Patrick Mahomes, obviously, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield, Tua Tagovailoa. So if he's not getting these guys the ball in a catchable way that they can do something with it, it's a pretty big reflection on Jalen Hurts' actual skill set. But once again, the usage is what matters for all these positions. Obviously, I want guys to be as efficient as possible with that usage. But if they're not, just having the volume is a big thing. I'll always point to Saquon Barkley, a guy that in every analytic for the last 2 years has not looked that great, doesn't avoid tackles that well, doesn't really add value per play in terms of that expected points added metric, guys creating plays that lead to more points. But what does happen with guys like Saquon is that they get a ton of volume. So the volume is always going to be the key thing to look for. Volume isn't sticky. Efficiency tends to be a little bit more sticky. For Jalen Hurts, though, enough of both to make some sense. And again, the run game stuff is so important here. If you're a QB and you're running 10.5 times per game, 3.2 red zone rushes per game, there's such a high opportunity there to have these outlier days, even if you are going to get some stinky ones like him at 8K going against the Jets seemed like a spot you could play maybe to get contrarian. He definitely doesn't come through there, doesn't create enough value for himself or his pass catchers. But if he plays, let's say the Bears, this is a QB that can get you 50 points in that game. So that's why we look at the efficiency and the volume. That's why a guy like Jalen Hurts, hard to ignore him being the top QB overall in the SPAGS score that we're going to look at through the rest of this video. Number 2, Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes doing fine this year. One thing that jumped out to me, though, which you can see on the screen, no TDs on throws of 20+ yards. He actually hasn't recorded a touchdown, hasn't recorded a sack, has recorded a 9% interception rate on deep throws, which for Patrick Mahomes, when we always look at for Patrick Mahomes is how great he is as a QB, as a pure QB. He's really adding a little more value in the run game this year. 4.8 rushes per game, good for 0.75 EPA. That actually would be among best at QB. So Patrick Mahomes just not playing the way that we expect him to in terms of just creating value just through the air. He's adding a little more in the run game. He's not getting it downfield at a high rate either. 3.7 deep throws per game en route to not getting a touchdown. Certainly some positive regression due from Mahomes. Like the fact he hasn't taken a sack on a deep throw is a great sign, but he should be creating touchdowns. Like there should be MVS getting open downfield. MVS has been terrible. Kadarius Toney, I know, does get a lot of those gimmicky kind of close to the line of scrimmage touches. He's still a guy that can get downfield. Travis Kelce can get downfield. It's surprising to see him not getting a touchdown on deep throws, which is what we know of Mahomes. So I do expect him to regress positively. I don't know because of the lack of rushing upside if he can ever pass Jalen Hurts, but he's pretty close here. 60.9 SPAGS score compared to a 63.7 for Jalen Hurts. So all it really takes is Jalen Hurts to keep kind of mitting along. And if Mahomes is a spike week game, maybe this week against the Chargers, a team that cannot defend out wide at all, it's a spot where you could see Mahomes take number 1 in the rankings. For right now, though, the lack of rushing upside does hold him back. Similar thing for Justin Herbert, who's in the 3-hole. You can see on the screen, 5.2 rushes per game, 4.6 deep throws. Again, rushing and deep throws is what creates your most fantasy value. If a QB's running, it's just easy points as well as potential touchdowns. If a guy's throwing downfield, that's where you get 20 yards on a play, a touchdown for 50 yards on a play. That's the biggest upside you can get for these guys. So when you see those guys performing at a high level, best example I can give is Josh Allen his rookie year, where I noticed a lot of accuracy issues, but was getting the ball downfield, was running with some efficiency and some volume. game. He ended up being a great player in his rookie year. Same thing with Anthony Richardson, of course, bless his heart. Do signs of the cross. I'm not Catholic, but I guess we have to do it when we talk about AR right now. Another guy this year showing similar upside, and that was without him really getting the ball downfield as much as he did in college. So I think that's sort of the traits you're looking for overall to sort of put a bow on what it means to understand what the SPAGS rankings are. Herbert, though, very efficient for the most part. Underlying metrics, maybe not quite as great. 74% on target rate, 79% catchable ball rate. Those are pretty good. Definitely some guys a little bit better, but Herbert does enough of everything. Again, getting that ball downfield, running a little bit per game. Just, again, 5.2 rushes for him is actually a pretty big increase, which is something that I hope to see in the offseason for him with Kellen Moore, a guy that made Dak Prescott run a little bit more last year. So for Justin Herbert, I think you're getting the results you'd want to see. He's running okay in pretty much every category. 4.3 touchdown rate when getting pressured. Another 4.3 touchdown rate when throwing deep. So he's there. I think he can run better as well in some spots. But Herbert, to me, I think, very solid QB. The stacks make sense. He's a player that every single week you should have some confidence in, as long as the price tag, of course, for DFS doesn't get too onerous. So Josh Allen's kind of a tough one. And let's look at the chats real fast. Spurious News saying, Hurts is nice IRL, but feels like I overpaid this year in fantasy. Most of my Hurts-Browns teams are poorly constructed and low in advance rates. I think that's fair. I mean, the big question in best ball with Hurts and all the elite QBs to me was just, are they going to do enough for you to vault them past the guys that are, can get you 20-point games, get you 25-point games? Andy Dalton had a great fantasy game this year. Was that enough to keep these guys at bay? And Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, all three of them have not done enough to keep those guys at bay. So that's really the bigger issue. I think over the course of a season, again, if you're playing on the site like Drafters or if you're playing for the regular season prize on a site like Underdog, like these guys are still going to be players that have outlier seasons over the course of a season and can give you points throughout those, the first 14 weeks of the year. But in terms of a pure 1 week spike week kind of thing, unless they're putting up 40 and 50, they're not going to get you there. And none of these guys are putting up 40 and 50 right now. So when they do, though, it'll make a pretty big difference in your portfolio. For right now, they're just playing like an elevated version of a normal QB. Or in the case of Mahomes and Josh Allen, they're just playing like a QB. Hurts, at least, you're getting some rushing upside that goes along with it. Josh Allen. So Josh Allen, to me, just not the same player he's been the last few years. The usage for him coming down again, you can see on the screen, just less than 4 rushes and deep throws per game. That's each. So collectively still a little bit under 8 deep throws and rushes per game, 3.5 deep throws per game, working out well, 0.55 EPA on those throws, connecting with a 76% catchable ball rate for Josh Allen, one of the best marks in the league. But the volume isn't there. This team, I guess, thinks that they can just get away with playing, kind of conservatively. They're certainly feeding Stephon Diggs a lot, but they're not getting those Gabe Davis 50-yard bombs quite as much. They're not forcing it downfield. As you saw last game, they're happy to get little check down plays to guys like Quentin Morris, guys like Deontay Hardy that ended up scoring the touchdowns in that game. So they're just not playing the same way. And when you couple that with the fact Josh Allen only running 3.7 times per game, still 1.3 of those are in the red zone. So you have some touchdown equity there, but the crush of volume there, the chance for 50-yard games on the ground, 60-yard games on the ground, it's not there right now for Josh Allen. So he is a guy that I think is kind of ebbing the wrong way. And it's what Spurious News is talking about. Not an elite QB that's paying off because he's just not running enough. And something to keep in mind maybe moving forward, as we have these rushing QBs and their team starts to mature around them, and as they get stronger as, an overall collective, and you don't have to have Josh Allen, who's got a history of elbow issues, who had basically an LCL tear a couple years ago that didn't get the Tommy John surgery for, and he's kind of been playing through it. And I think there's been a little bit less effectiveness, according to some people out there, with how he's been playing, at least on tape, with that elbow injury, and ever since then. But I think the overall crush of that is just that Josh Allen ran so much early in his career, had so much value from getting downfield. They just don't have to do that as much because he can play in the system a little bit more. He can take some checkdowns to James Cook, who's gotten a lot more usage than any running back has in the pass game. This Bills offense the last few years, it's just a different offense. It doesn't mean the ceiling's not there week to week for Josh Allen, but over the course of a year, I think it's a pretty big chasm between him and Jalen Hurts, just with the rushing volume, the downfield throws volume. A better team for Buffalo has meant a worse situation for Josh Allen in a lot of different ways. Baker Mayfield, I'm surprised he hung in here after kind of a crappy game this past weekend, but he remains at number 5 in the SPAGS score. The reasons are going to be he's dropping back a good amount of times, 36.2 dropbacks per game, 0.05 EPA per pass, 0.05 EPA per dropback, so he's positive in everything he's doing. When he's pressured, he's also not falling apart, just a negative 0.06 EPA there, which is actually pretty good. If you're under a 0.3, negative 0.3 EPA when getting pressured, that's usually where I would look for to go, all right, this guy's handling pressure pretty well. Baker Mayfield handling pressure pretty well. 4.4 deep shots per game, 5 rush attempts per game. It's shocking to see Baker running that much. He's not exactly a high volume, high expected value rusher, but still a guy out there, 5 runs per game, 4.4 deep shots. That's the fantasy little values there that can add up for a guy like Baker. Do I think Baker has a 40-point ceiling? Probably not, but he has more of a 25-point, 30-point ceiling than people realize. And people are willing to play Jared Goff week after week. People are willing to play Kirk Cousins. There's going to be a game where that Buck stack hits, and then Baker also has a little bit on the ground. And I think he could be a tournament-winning QB at some point this year if he hasn't been already. I don't think he has been so far. But he's playing a little bit better than people realize. Still expect some regression to come his way. But Baker for right now looks really good in these metrics. And it surprises me that he's ahead of Tua. But he is ahead of Tua, and that's just what the math says based on this proprietary statistic that I completely made up based on things that I look at. Tua Tagovailoa coming in at number 6 here. The issue with Tua is just that he's not adding a lot of value in the run game. He's running 2.3 times per game and is an awful rusher when he runs. A -1 EPA when rushing. So basically, if he's running the ball, you're losing a point on that play, which is not where you want that to be as a QB. The deep shots as well have come down a little bit for him as his offense has clearly not had to press him downfield quite as much. Just 3.8 deep throws per game. I think about 2.3 of which go to Tyreek. So he's getting it to the guy that you need to get it to downfield, but you do want to see this offense, which at one point, earlier in the year was throwing it deep 7 times a game. This is a very vertical offense on paper, but it's one that right now is playing less vertical by the week just because they don't have to. And that kind of ties in what we talked about with Josh Allen a little bit, where if you don't have to throw it deep downfield, you're probably not going to, even if you are a progressive and aggressive coach like Mike McDaniel. So kind of interesting to see that with Tua, but everything else looks good for him. A high catchable ball rate, 82% catchable ball, 73% on target, which means basically when he's hitting a guy in stride, getting him the ball where they need to get to make a play. 0.21 EPA per drop back, 0.28 EPA per pass. Everything is good besides the running, but for him to have this explosive ceiling, for him to be worth, a top 5 round pick, let's say next year, he's got to run more and he's got to run with more efficiency. And I don't think that's going to change for Tua. So this might be a ceiling is like 5-6. Maybe you can get closer to Herbert range, but even then Herbert runs a little bit more. I would like to see the deep shot volume increase for Tua because that's clearly where the Miami offense's bread is buttered, but it's not quite there. There we go. Be aggressive. Be aggressive. We are all cheerleaders for Tua. I love this Miami offense. It's the most fun one in the league, I think, and probably the most fun one we've had since that vaunted Rams-Chiefs year where that game had a 58-point implied total and got moved to LA from Mexico City. But I still want to see them keep putting the pedal to the metal. And I do think maybe that Broncos game, maybe the little bit of getting it out of their system there, some revenge for the defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio. Maybe that was something that they were like, all right, now we can just play like a normal team. I don't know. But it definitely is a little bit something lacking there with their aggressiveness downfield that I've come to expect from Miami. And it's surprising to see it starting to regress this way week to week. So he needs that 5 passing TD game to hit that 30+. Yeah, it's basically it. He needs guys to take him along for the ride, which kind of sucks. Still think he's great. Still think he's a very solid play. Don't think he's the MVP. I think he's very much a function of an offense here. And he himself, he's efficient. He's good. But I think that a lot of this comes down to the Brock Purdy, Kyle Shanahan thing. I think Tua, again, is Miami's Brock Purdy, and there's nothing wrong with that. Matthew Stafford coming up here at number 7. He's another guy solid and unspectacular. What I compared him to last week was a discount version of Tua. I think that holds steady here. Slightly more dropbacks per game at 42 because the Rams are generally in more competitive games, but still pretty efficient with everything. Actually could be throwing a little bit better. 73% catchable ball rate, 65% on target. Kind of surprising given the solid route runners he has that he's not a little bit more efficient in both those metrics, but everything looks okay. He's running 1.8 times per game, so not adding a lot of value there. Getting it downfield 4.2 times per game. He kind of looks to me like the good side of average is what Stafford does. I don't think Stafford's a world beater. I think, again, like Tua, like a lot of these guys, the stack is what gets you there. Stafford's going to score points. But for him right now, he's playing pretty well. Hard to nickel and dime him too much, but just definitely a player that I think a lot of the value is coming from his receivers and not so much for anything that he's doing himself. Lamar, though, Lamar's one guy who could really surge here. Now, Lamar on the year not playing that well. Negative 0.12 EPA per pass. Negative 0.06 EPA per dropback. Negative 0.9 EPA when getting pressured. So if he goes against blitz-heavy teams that get home, Lamar is still a really big risk point that I think can have a blow-up day at some point in the bad way. 3.5 deep shots per game, good for a 0.5 EPA. That's okay. Hasn't had a touchdown, hasn't had a pick, hasn't had a sack on a deep throw. So I guess those are positive things. Would certainly like to see him run a little more positively into touchdowns downfield. Where he creates the most value, though, 10 rushes per game. There are now only 2 QBs in the league running 10 times per game. It is him and Jalen Hurts. Those 10 rushes per game are so valuable. 2.3 red zone rushes as well for Lamar. So he can definitely take a surge here. He needs to get a spike week at some point. When that'll be, who knows? But I do think Lamar is still playing very heavily, still playing very well. And he's a guy where I really do think I was going to try to mouse over the background, and I realize now you can't do that. Lamar should be able to pass Stafford. I think should be able to pass Tua. Theoretically should be able to pass Tua. We'll see. He should be able to pass Baker Mayfield. I think Lamar's ceiling in the SPAGS rankings is probably ahead of Justin Herbert if he really starts to cook. The issue is just right now he's not playing that well, not playing that efficiently, and that's something that's going to always hurt him in my rankings. It's week 7, so you got to just trust your nut. There, you got to trust your nut, not your gut. Always, your testicles are going to tell you everything you need to know. If you are going to click a player in a DFS site, you're going to play him on your fantasy leagues. If your testicle throbs slightly in that moment, just know that's not the guy for you. You know, you always got to trust your nut. Jared Goff here coming in at number 9. Really the thing that stands out for Jared Goff. So he's getting better week to week, 0.08 EPA per pass, 0.08 EPA per drop back. Under pressure, he's okay, negative 0.5 EPA, 15% pressure or 50% sack rate when getting pressured. So that's pretty much, he's an average player when he's getting pressured. That's fine. But 2.3 deep shots per game, not coming up at all. Amon-Ra St. Brown, we're going to talk about it a little bit. He's playing really well at one of the lowest ADOTs among top receivers. Jamison Williams back out there. He's got one good play this past week, but still not getting downfield at high volume. It's just not an explosive offense right now. And maybe that changes without David Montgomery to lean on to give those 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of carries. Maybe they have to force it downfield a little bit more. But I think right now for Jared Goff, again, he doesn't run very much. The way he's going to really unleash a ceiling to move up these rankings and to give you that high floor, that high ceiling every single week is going to be him pressing it downfield. And he's just not doing that enough yet. The Lions, though, I think have shown that they believe in their team, definitely playing a little more conservatively, I think, on both sides of the ball, still going forward on 4th downs when it's short range. But besides that, I think they're trusting kind of the ecosystem a little bit more. So there is kind of just diminishing returns where teams get so good, they just don't force their QBs into action quite as much. Jared Goff, I think, is kind of benefiting from that in terms of his efficiency, but in terms of the opportunity for fantasy, we're just not getting quite as much because he's just playing it a lot closer to the vest than I think you'd like him to see. Brock Purdy rounds us out here. Again, Brock Purdy is solid as can be, but he's not dropping back a lot. 29.5 dropbacks per game. Obviously, this game against Cleveland didn't help him out that much either. Losing that one didn't look that great in that game either, but still he's efficient. 0.25 EPA per pass, 0.25 EPA per dropback, a negative 0.33 EPA when getting pressured. Has not thrown a pick when getting pressured yet. That's a good sign. Throwing it deep only 2.2 times per game and running only 2.5 times per game. So Brock Purdy, a great part of an offense. Probably a little better in terms of the upside relative to like a Tua. Tua, I think, has more 5 passing TD upside. Brock Purdy has more 3 passing TD, 2 rushing TD upside. But I think overall for Brock Purdy, it's just hard to expect it week to week for a Niners team that's going to be good. Maybe if McCaffrey misses a week or two, maybe Debo. I think Debo should be good to go. But McCaffrey missing a week or two, maybe you do see Purdy get back a little bit more to what he did last year, forcing the ball downfield, a lot of the offense flowing through his hands more. I think that's certainly in the range of outcomes, especially against Minnesota on Monday night. I think Brock Purdy is going to be an interesting captain play in that one. But for right now, I think for Brock Purdy, he's just the guy, again, we use the analogy a lot here. You just keep the schedule running on time, keeping the trains running on time. That's basically what Brock Purdy provides here. Spags, I'm an AR shoulder to cry on if you need. I'm not crying over anything at this point. We will certainly see how it goes. But yes, definitely trending towards a season-ending injury, and we just move on. That's all we can do. Imagine Wemby playing wide receiver in the NFL. He would break his knees repeatedly. You can't even get Darnell Washington out there at tight end without him getting clipped to the knees over and over again. So I think Wemby playing receiver would be a very tough time. CMC reports seem like he might play, but we will see. Yeah, I mean, look, if I were them, if he wants to go, I guess it's hard to keep him off the field. I really would want to rest this guy. The crush of touches they're giving him is just way too fucking much. I mean, even if you're a CMC backer in best ball or redraft or whatever, you should want them to rest him this coming up week. Obviously, it's a really good matchup, one that he could put up 40 points. So I get wanting to see him out there. But like, if you're going to have him healthy for 17 weeks of the season, I think you really do need to, see him rest here because he's going to get hurt worse if he keeps playing like this. Let's keep it going here, guys. Of course, going to move on to the positions, but quickly going to pander. Please subscribe down below. I should probably have the GIF going. Please subscribe down below. Please hit the like button. Please leave a comment. Splash Play perpetually on the march to 3K subs. One day we're going to get there, and it is going to be glorious. So be a part of that movement here. Splash Play, of course. No scripts here. We don't prepare it. No pre-records. Just live videos. Just data. Just vibes. That's here on Splash Play. So please join the journey here. 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. All right, let's go to the running backs up next. Running backs going to be an interesting one here. Austin Eckler holding on to the top spot. I do not expect him to hold on to the top spot over the course of the season. That Dallas game, I think, showed some of the downside overall for Austin Eckler, where facing a tough defense, he's not getting the crush of touches he got in week 1. Week 1 was such an outlier game for him, and really that offense overall, where Eckler got there in a big way. Josh Kelly got there and had over 15 carries as well. That's not something I expect here. So we expected Eckler to kind of regress a little bit. That said, the usage on paper is still very good. 4 red zone rushes per game, 2 red zone targets per game. So 6 opportunities in the red zone per game is pretty good. But if he gets back under 20 intended touches, which it does seem like, guys like Spiller in the mix yesterday, Josh Kelly in the mix, on Monday for Monday Night Football. So Eckler, I think, comes with some risk points that he doesn't want to get 30 touches a game. He's on this contract that is not behooving him to be just running himself into the ground. So I think that's sort of the pain point for Eckler. I don't think he's going to be number 1 next week. I think he probably ends up closer to top 5 over the course of a year. Still a very solid player, very solid role. Just one where the Chargers can move other ways, both now at running back to just keep the touch count down on Eckler, or they could find Keenan Allen in the red zone. They could find Gerald Everett. They have a lot of weapons now, and a lot of what they've put on film is just kind of setting people up to use the running back as a little bit of a decoy in the red zone, I think. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right. That's good news. I always love getting the AR news on the stream so people can throw it in and want me to be sad. Christian McCaffrey, number 2 on this list here. McCaffrey's usage great. He's now basically just a net neutral in the run game, negative 0.01 EPA per rush, which when a guy has that much volume, if he's a negative 0.01 EPA per rush, that's fine. Obviously, when it starts to get lower than that, you go, okay, this guy's just a pure volume back in the run game. But it happens. Run plays aren't as efficient inherently as pass plays. So that's what it's going to be. He is also, though, in the pass game, really crushing it. For a running back to have a 0.37 EPA per target like Christian McCaffrey does, that's pretty crazy. But the main thing for McCaffrey is just the workload overall. 22.8 opportunities per game, as you can see on the screen. 6 of them are in the red zone. That's crazy usage overall for McCaffrey. But he's just a dude, I think, again, he's better than Saquon. 15.5% avoided tackle rate in the run game, 9% avoided tackle rate in the pass game. Perfectly acceptable numbers, nothing too outstanding there, but it's just the efficiency over and over again, being able to do what he does, being able to chip away the amount of yardage, the touchdown equity, all of that. That's the main usage for Christian McCaffrey. But he's not, he's not Devon Achane in terms of the efficiency metrics where you're seeing this guy break 50-yard plays, but he's going to break enough in a game that it sort of makes sense in terms of the overall picture. So I know with McCaffrey, it's just, he's another guy that's getting over 20 touches, and that's sort of worth what it is. Zach Moss at number 3 is a shocker. His opportunities per game is coming down. He's now down to 22.6. Last week was out 24. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor being back in the mix. I expect it to continue to come down every single week. And Zach Moss won't have plays like he had last week where he broke like a 50-yard touchdown in that game. It's not going to happen every single time out for Zach Moss. I think he's probably the most due for regression out of anybody in this top 10. I don't think it's probably not even close, honestly, unless we're counting the injured guys. So I think for Zach Moss, if you drafted him at this point, feel good about it. If you're in a season-long league and you can trade him for anything, I would do that immediately. He's a great player, relative to what he was. I thought he played good last year too. But I think this year for Zach Moss, it's just a bad situation. And 1, 2, where, again, I'm always somebody that's going to say with running back contracts, running back usage, running backs and best ball in any sort of format, be careful of them. When you watch Zach Moss, it's why did they pay Jonathan Taylor? Having Jonathan Taylor in the mix probably helps Zach Moss a little bit and sort of how that works with how defenses prepare. But overall, Zach Moss has been playing better than most running backs in football, getting the volume that's higher than most running backs in football. There's really not a reason you pay a running back when Zach Moss can do this for you. He's been great. Zach Moss has been one of the best running backs in football, and nobody realizes it because it's just not the sexiest play. It's not the most newsworthy play with what he's been doing. All right, let's keep it going here. David Montgomery, 0.02 EPA per rush, 0.07 EPA per pass, 40.2 snaps per game for David Montgomery. The big issue for him is now this rib injury is going to knock him down a little bit. Obviously, might be out 1 week, 2 weeks. I think the thing that I saw is most likely could be out 2 to 3. We will see here. We do have Jahmyr Gibbs coming back in. Some risk as well that Gibbs could take a role. David Montgomery still, I think, very much involved in terms of what he's getting here. The outcome for him was always being Jamal Williams for the Lions this year, but a better version of it. He's coming through with that 5.4 red zone rushes per game. Again, not the most efficient in the world, but still positive efficiency in the run game and the pass game. Montgomery's good. Montgomery's just a good play. Another great part of a zero RB portfolio for sure. But a guy as well that I think does come with some rest of season risk. There are whiffs to me with David Montgomery of Josh Jacobs last year, where Jacobs, big advance rate guy. And even then, we'll see what Montgomery does over the next 6 weeks if he can actually be a big advance rate guy, if things hit the skids for him and if Gibbs actually earns himself a real role. But I think he's a guy that, to me, as we get into the playoffs, as we get deeper in, and you could see guys like Gibbs getting more of a role, or you see Montgomery maybe get banged up even more. He's taken a lot of hits, man, against 8-man boxes and things that you don't want to take a lot of hits in. I think for him, he's a guy that I think will advance you well. But when it comes to the playoffs, I think there's some risk there that he might just have some dud games, either because of the team just going a different direction at running back a little bit more, or him just being hurt because of it's a lot of work that's been going his way. Let's keep it going here. We got Kenneth Walker coming up next. Kenneth Walker is the one that I really need to highlight once again. I think he's a guy that might be the most live to finish the year as a top 3 running back. You still have the risk of Zach Charbonnet, who I still think Zach Charbonnet is a better running back in terms of what he can do across every sort of play style you're going to ask him to play than Kenneth Walker. But Kenneth Walker, in terms of his run plays, him being more efficient this year. He was a negative EPA rusher, negative EPA per target guy last year. He's at a 0.02 EPA per rush this year, 0.21 EPA per pass. His avoided tackle rate was at 33% last year. This year at 27%. So not quite as shifty, but doing a little bit more with it in terms of just getting yardage every single play. He's getting a downfield target sometimes, 0.2 downfield targets per game, 20 plus air yards, 5 red zone rushes, 0.2 red zone targets. It's elite usage for Kenneth Walker in an offense that, frankly, is not as explosive as it should be. DK Metcalf not breaking big plays the longer that continues to happen. Tyler Lockett, too, not really getting targets downfield that lead to touchdowns. If that keeps happening, you're going to see Kenneth Walker keep doing this every week. But I think really his growth from year 1 to year 2, I'll always make the contrast. Dameon Pierce, to me, looks like a much worse player, though he was also very inefficient last year. He's now inefficient this year, but also not doing the things in terms of avoided tackles that he was doing last year. Kenneth Walker, I think, just took everything to heart, made improvements, made himself look better, and he's holding Zach Charbonnet at bay. And maybe Charbonnet is part of why Walker did kind of put in the work to get there, but the results are there on paper. Walker, to me, most live to finish the top 3 back, and if you can trade him for anything cheap, if you can somehow trade Zach Moss and get Kenneth Walker back, I would do that in a heartbeat. I think Kenneth Walker is the most live to be there. Spags, how are you, sir? Hope your usage in the bedroom has been top 5, my friend. I'm glad that Johnny cares about me fucking doing fantasy football here, but thank you for thinking about my dick in this time of need. I appreciate that, Johnny. Shout out our guy Mark as well, GM Spags. And saying how Walker is potentially the second best running back on his own team, it still might be top 3 by year end. That's just how it goes, man. Coaches lock in on players, and they have guys that they took with draft capital the year before, and it never goes away, even though they basically took Charbonnet with the exact same draft capital. I do think that Charbonnet is a much better pass game back. I also think he's a better short down and distance back as well. But I think for me, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the usage is. So for right now, Charbonnet not that involved. Walker is still a risk point, but we got past the bye now. The usage didn't increase for Charbonnet. So I think we're okay for Walker for the most part, but the risk is just that if he gets to like a 60-40 share, even 66-33 share, that's where Walker's upside could be hurt a little bit, let alone if he somehow loses any red zone work. The red zone work to him, that's like a gift from God right now. Tony Pollard here. Tony Pollard, I got to point it out, man, he's just not looking that good. I thought on Monday Night Football, I thought he looked a little bit more like old Tony Pollard, but we've talked about this a lot throughout the offseason and these videos in season as well. Tony Pollard's efficiency went down pretty notably last year as he started to kind of accrue more touches, started to get more work. He's just not a guy to me that's meant to have 20 touches a game, but it sucks for fantasy. His value is having 20 touches a game. That's just the only way he's going to get there. So I think there's some real concerns for Tony Pollard overall, but 4.8 red zone opportunities per game in terms of the run game, 1 inside the pass game as well in the red zone. It's great usage for him, but it is getting a little bit worse week to week. Last week, we saw kind of them using the Tony Pollard little share play there to get Dak Prescott in the end zone. So maybe they're seeing something where their tendencies are making the defenses key in a little bit too much on Tony Pollard. And as a result, they're going to pass a little bit more or use Dak in the run game and the RPO a little bit more. I don't really know what to think of this Cowboys offense because I don't believe a lot in Mike McCarthy as a play caller or Brian Schottenheimer as an offensive coordinator. But I think for them, it's just Tony Pollard's not the same guy as last year. I still wouldn't trade him because you're trading him on a low right now. But he's basically, to me, he's like Saquon. He's just a guy that's going to get there now if he's getting 20 touches and 5 red zone carries. And if he doesn't get that, then he's probably going to get you closer to 10 to 15 points. And that doesn't kill you. It certainly doesn't kill you, but you can find that 10 to 15 points from a late round running back. And that's always kind of the risk point. All right. Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams banged up right now. We should be seeing some combo of Zach Evans, Myles Gaskin, Darrell Henderson is on the Rams practice squad now. Going to be something weird that goes on for the Rams backfield this week with no Kyren, but he's looking a lot better. Kyren still not the most efficient in the pass game, negative 0.3 EPA per target for him, which is surprising because he's getting a lot of pass game usage, but he's great running the football right now. 0.1 EPA per rush for a guy who's running 17 times per game, or I guess closer to 16 times per game for Kyren Williams. Pretty noteworthy. 13.4% avoid a tackle rate, not doing a lot for anybody. But the red zone usage, once again, like I can't say enough about how important it is to target red zone usage, because every single week we keep seeing these situations where some guy's under 10% owned, and it's a guy that's getting 5-ish red zone touches per game. Like Travis Etienne gets, I think, 3 to 5 mostly. And he gets there as an outlier player on a site like FanDuel where it's so touchdown dependent. So really keying in on these guys that are getting effective red zone usage or getting any red zone usage is really an important thing. And it feels kind of basic to say that, but with all the crush of stats out there, all the different things you could look at, I think sometimes just ignoring the core one of like, this guy's getting a lot of red zone work. That's the kind of thing that I think is really important that sometimes people miss the forest from the trees on a little bit. But Kyren Williams, I think overall looking really good. Kind of a bummer he's getting hurt at the stretch, because I really thought, visually that game that he put up this past week is probably his best one as a rusher. Obviously hard to argue that when you're putting up 150 rushing yards, basically. But Kyren Williams, I think very solid here. The usage not quite as great as Eckler and McCaffrey as it was earlier in the year, but still for Kyren, very solid player. The risk now is just that Zach Evans runs hot, earns himself a role, maybe a Myles Gaskin, though Gaskin got cut from the Vikings too. So don't think Gaskin has any juice. I'd be surprised if any of the Rams can really steal a role from Kyren, but the most live one is probably Zach Evans if you are going to target it. Guy from Ole Miss who's pretty solid, not great. I compare him to Tank Bigsby, maybe a little bit better, but less shifty. Josh Jacobs, another guy who's just not as good as last year. Negative 0.15 EPA per rush, negative 0.04 EPA per pass. Where he's getting onto this board is going to be because of his overall usage, 23.8 opportunities per game, including 4 of which are red zone rushes, 0.7 of which per game are red zone targets. It's great usage for Josh Jacobs. It's just on a shitty offense and 1-2 where I think it's really ebbing the wrong way. This week is a key matchup, I think, for the Raiders, where if Davante Adams doesn't go off this week, if he doesn't go full ass here and put up 20 to 30 to 40 points in this game against the Bears, I don't know how the season's going to get better for them, because this is the best matchup they're going to have basically all year. And Davante Adams, to me, the last 3 weeks, I've mentioned, you can see the numbers starting to come down, starting to look less good. But the eye test for him, I really don't think he's trying very hard out there. I don't think he's running routes at his full gusto. He has a shoulder injury, so if you want to give him some cover, you can. But Adams, I think, kind of goes hand in hand with Josh Jacobs, where if Adams isn't out there drawing attention away, making it so they can't put 8 men in the box, Josh Jacobs is never going to get more efficient. And Jacobs is already not efficient. So I think with Josh Jacobs, I wouldn't get rid of him necessarily. I don't think you're trading at an apex. You're getting great value back. But I think this is a really precious few weeks here for the Raiders, where if they go the wrong way, a lot of things are going to fall apart for them. And it's really only going to benefit Michael Mayer and probably not benefit Josh Jacobs, maybe Jacoby Myers and Trey Tucker a little bit more. But I'm worried about Adams, and I think this weekend is a very big litmus test for him. And by proxy, pretty big litmus test for Josh Jacobs as well. All right. Let's see. Alvin Kamara here coming in at number 9. Again, 25.7 opportunities per game is pretty good, but the inefficiency is very noteworthy. Negative 0.05 EPA per rush, negative 0.3 EPA per target. Getting great red zone work, though. 2.3 red zone opportunities per game, 1.3 red zone targets per game, along with that. So it's good usage for Alvin Kamara. It's just if he's not that good, and they might realize at some point, I don't know if they will, because it's the Dennis Allen coach team, they realized at some point that Kendre Miller might be a lot more, I'm going to say a lot more juicy. He might have a lot more juice, but he might be a lot more juicy as well than Alvin Kamara. I would right away give 10 of these touches to Kendre Miller. If I were the coach, of course, I'm not the coach. I'm just here rambling about things. But I think for Alvin Kamara, it's just the best days are not there. 4% avoided tackle rate for him. So he is the only guy in the top 20 running backs that is not avoiding tackles that well, or, and that Tony Pollard's here not avoiding tackles. It's Kamara, Pollard, Joe Mixon, AJ Dillon. These are the only guys amongst the top 20 SPAGS score running backs who are avoiding tackles that poorly. So I just think Kamara is dust, but if you keep getting the work, you keep getting the work, and that's sort of what it is. But it is noteworthy here that he does rank ahead of Saquon. So I think Saquon's not that great. Kamara's more volume, so that puts him ahead, but that's the main reason that Kamara's here, just a crush of volume. Last guy on the board here, Raheem Mostert. So Mostert, I guess, surprising to see him at number 10 here, but it all comes down to the volume and the overall underlying usage. 15.8 intended touches per game for Raheem Mostert, but he's great with them. 0.16 EPA per rush play, 0.43 EPA per pass play. Like, he's doing everything here. The red zone work is pretty good, though not as good as some of these guys that we've talked about. 3 red zone rushes per game, 0.7 red zone targets per game. 31% avoided tackle rate for Raheem Mostert, which for a guy at his age is incredibly impressive, especially because he's always been kind of a straight line runner. He's throwing a little bit more shiftiness in there. So the thing for Mostert is, if he were getting Eckler level touches, if you were getting McCaffrey level touches, he would continue to be the number 1 running back in football the rest of the year. For right now, though, like, he's a top 3 play overall in terms of fantasy football, which is what he's been doing in half-point PPR. I don't expect that to hold, especially as we get Achane back, especially as we get, guys like Jeff Wilson back in the mix a little bit. So that's the tough part, is that he needs more volume. He deserves more volume. Raheem Mostert, I think, is a very strong running back and probably the best player right now in football relative to the opportunity they've been given. But he's just not going to get that work. So hard to say that he can ever take a leap upwards, but you got to give him kudos here. I hope he stays in the top 10 because he's been tremendous in terms of what he's been doing in terms of his efficiency. But you got to get 20 plus touches if you're going to make the top of this list. What if it's only Jeff Wilson in December? Then Jeff Wilson's probably going to be a slightly less effective version of Raheem Mostert. Like, I think that's what it is. I think once Achane gets back out there, assuming he could stay healthy, I think that's going to make it really tough for Jeff Wilson because they clearly would like to go to Achane more. They've gone to Achane over Mostert, and Mostert's been great. Jeff Wilson, I think we haven't seen anything from, obviously. So I think it's unlikely that Wilson's the only guy left, but if he is the only guy left, he's probably going to do really well. All right. There's all the running backs. So let's keep it going here, and let's head to the world of wide receivers up next. Take a swig of water for the working man. All right, so some surprises here at receiver. Tyreek, no longer number 1. It is, in fact, Cooper Kupp at number 1. And this one's about as close as you can get, which you can see in the scores here on the screen. 33.3 is a SPAGS score for Cooper Kupp. 33.2 is a SPAGS score for Tyreek Hill. The reason why is probably just that Cooper Kupp is this much more efficient than Tyreek Hill right now. 0.76 EPA per target for Cooper Kupp. 0.73 for Tyreek Hill. Cooper Kupp last year, I'm just going to say it out loud, was a negative EPA per target guy, was getting there mostly on volume. So I do kind of expect some regression, though his usage patterns are a little bit better this year. He's getting 2.5 deep targets per game, good for a 1.1 EPA on those targets, getting 1.5 red zone targets per game, 10.5 targets per game overall. So if Kupp can keep up this exact level of usage moving forward, I think that he is the best receiver in football, or at least 1A, 1B with Tyreek. If it kind of comes down a little bit more, which I do expect, like Puka needs to come up a little bit more at some point. Tutu could still take a little bit off the table. I think Cooper Kupp is starting really hot for these first 2 games off the injury. And he definitely deserves the number 1 spot based on what he's put on tape so far. But the bigger sample size for Tyreek. Tyreek's done this for every game so far this year. He's, I think, the better overall receiver. I would not trade Tyreek Hill to get Cooper Kupp if that's a reflection on how these rankings play out. But I think Cooper Kupp, it's hard to ignore what he's doing. He's playing really well. He's the best receiver in football right now besides Tyreek, even if I do expect some regression to come there. Tyreek, though, not that far away at number 2. Again, it's Cooper Kupp, 0.76 EPA per target. Tyreek, 0.73 EPA per target. Cooper Kupp, 10.5 intended touches per game compared to 10.2 for Tyreek Hill. Tyreek, though, 2.7 deep shots per game compared to 2.5 for Cooper Kupp. So once again, these guys are basically the same player right now, which is surprising given their skill sets. Like that Tyreek probably runs 0.5 faster in a 40 time than Cooper Kupp. But these guys look functionally pretty familiar. So I think that's something here where it does speak to what the Rams have done offensively with their scheme and all of that. The volume that Kupp is getting is great. The fact that Kupp could be more efficient on paper than Tyreek Hill is absolutely insane. And that really does speak to the Rams coaching being really resurgent this year after a terrible year last year. So I think these guys are basically, again, 1A, 1B here. It does say 1 and 2 because Tyreek is behind a little bit in SPAGS score, but just incredible usage for both guys here. And I think they are really strong plays and guys that could put up 40, 50 any single week they're out there. So they deserve the 9K plus price tags to get on DraftKings the rest of the year. Kupp volume is pretty great. That is true. Remember when people were begging for Dalvin on this team? Man, Mike McDaniel, yes. I mean, look, the Dolphins, I think, have learned pretty hard. Again, they're the other case study where did not add the luxury running back, did not add Jonathan Taylor, did not add Dalvin. And now they just ran out there with guys that had good metrics and that are performing incredibly well in an offense. That's what the running back position is. That's why running backs are basically tight ends. But nobody else out there on the internet's ever going to tell you that. But trust me, that is my biggest belief in the world. Keenan Allen at number 3. Keenan Allen coming down a little bit in efficiency, which you would expect with Mike Williams off the field. 0.61 EPA per target. Still incredibly good. Again, for the frame of reference, last year the top EPA per target receiver in football was Rashid Shaheed at 0.77 per target, I believe. This year, Keenan Allen being at 0.61. A lot of guys, a lot of receivers this year. If you are going to go with the meta game of running backs versus receivers and all of that, this is the most efficient receiver year that I think has ever existed. I don't have the back testing to go back through the first 6 weeks of every single season, but I could tell you these EPA metrics that all these receivers are putting up are so much higher across the board, and you could probably point to different things defensively that players aren't allowed to do, obviously, things that offensively getting more sophisticated. The too high safety stuff, probably giving some more opportunity for guys to be more reliable in terms of adding points with every target more so. But this is the most efficient year in football receivers that we've seen. So either these guys are all going to crater in the back half of the season, or this is going to be the most prolific wide receiver scoring season we've ever had. So I tend to think the latter, but just something to keep in mind here. But Keenan Allen, 11.4 intended touches per game. That does include 0.4 intended rushes per game. 1.6 red zone targets. He is basically their most involved red zone target besides Austin Eckler. And I think Everett and Parham both get a good amount of red zone work. But Keenan Allen, just a great receiver, great PPR player, half-point PPR, a little bit more finicky, but the touchdown equity being there for him is so good. And Keenan Allen, of course, the keynote here. If he caught one more pass worth 15 yards on Monday Night Football, Chris Spags would be here with 150 grand more in his pocket. So he deserves to be knocked down 10 spots as a result. But here we are. That's the one. Yeah, poor Spags there. I mean, look, it's got to be in there. It's the most noteworthy thing that he did this week was ruin my life on Monday Night Football. Jamar Chase, again, another guy this year, 0.34 EPA per target. Last year was a negative 0.1 EPA per target guy. So Jamar Chase playing a lot better despite a worse offensive environment for the Bengals for sure, even though I do think that Joe Burrow is rounding into form week by week. But on the year, Jamar Chase, 12.3 intended touches per game. It does include 0.2 intended rushes per game, 1.8 red zone targets per game as well, probably boosted a little bit by that game without T. Higgins. Chase's biggest issue is just having Higgins back in, gives another star receiver to target for X amount of times per game, 5 to 10, let's say, for T. Higgins. That's the biggest flaw in Jamar Chase's overall portfolio and opportunity. He's playing really well right now. I think I would expect him to hold around this spot. I do think he, A.J. Brown, Stephon Diggs, pretty flat tier overall. But I would say, I think I would put Chase behind Keenan Allen right now with what these guys have done on the year and would do that fairly comfortably. But sort of hard to ignore how great Chase has been. I think he'll still have spike weeks, but overall, the Bengals being less efficient, T. Higgins commanding more targets and being less good with them, and probably being due for positive regression in that front. Those are the things that worry me about Jamar Chase's overall picture, even though he's playing a lot better. Like Jamar Chase, to me, I thought there was a pretty big chasm between him and Justin Jefferson with how these guys played last year. This year, it's a lot closer in terms of how Jefferson was playing before an injury, and Chase is looking a lot better and getting more volume. So hard to ignore that. Chase, very solid player here. He's not going to fall in the top 10 at any point this year. A.J. Brown, 9.8 targets per game. As you can see on the screen, 2.3 deep targets. He's fine. The targets getting under 10 worries me a little bit because it does feel like we are starting to see a little bit more of the leveling out that we've expected. One thing to note, though, which is kind of interesting, some reports out there, I guess they might even be confirmed reports. A.J. Brown is the one that wanted Julio Jones in the mix after Quez Watkins went on IR. A.J. Brown also was the one who wanted A.J. Brown to get more targets. And you know what immediately happened was A.J. Brown getting more targets. So a lot of stroke in the Eagles organization does A.J. Brown have. So certainly possible that he can continue to get fed more whenever he goes, I'm A.J. Brown. I want the ball more. I know he's a gigantic man who's not functionally an adult baby, but a little bit of adult baby behavior by A.J. Brown. That said, guy can command targets both with his play on the field and also just yell at people until he gets targets. So that is something that doesn't track data-wise for fantasy, but I think does reflect the fact that he could continue to get more work as the season goes on. So I think, to me, as I've said before, I don't expect to go back to the 1A, 1B that we saw last year with A.J. Brown and Davante Smith. I do think it's going to be closer to a 1-2 / a 1-2-3 with Davante and Dallas Goedert. So I think there's an established pecking order right now, a lot of feeding of A.J. Brown. I don't think that stops here. He's a solid player, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to move past Chase, Allen, Hill, and Kupp. I think he probably also should fall behind Diggs, but will safely stay ahead of guys like Puka, guys like Adam Thielen, and I think guys like Adams and Amon-Ra, but we'll see about that. How do we get AJB to yell about Smith's targets? He won't. He doesn't want Davante to get anything. He wants Davante to just be running wind sprints out there like he's Alec Pierce. So that's what AJ Brown's hoping for. But crying AJ Brown does get the ball. That's what matters. Ultimately, if your tantrums work, are they really tantrums or are they just a great negotiation tactic? That's what AJ Brown's trying to find out. Worth pointing out here, this is where Justin Jefferson would go, but instead we were taking him out of the list because he's still on IR. Go to Stephon Diggs instead. Diggs basically playing exactly as he did last year, 0.32 EPA per target, which is exactly where he was last year. Getting more targets per game, though, at 11 per game, so that's pretty good for him. 103 air yards per game, so getting good downfield looks as well. 1.2 deep targets per game, 1.5 red zone targets per game. Just no flaws in Diggs' game. I think the explosive upside, again, because the Bills not forcing the ball downfield as much, that's sort of the biggest issue with Stephon Diggs in my eyes, but I don't know. Really nothing else to say about Diggs. He's just a dude that every week does his job, gives you 20 to 30 fantasy points, can give you 40 if things really push, if there's a Miami kind of matchup. But I think Diggs, to me, just a very solid player who deserved the draft capital he got in best ball. And I think he's never going to let you down, really. He's just going to kind of maybe not give you the 40-point ceilings you want to see. But that's, whatever. It's reliable points at receiver is a very important thing. And if he can give you 15 to 25 every single week without fail, like that's sort of the main thing here. I think this Buffalo offense is set up to have him doing that every single week. Puka Nacua hanging on here, though. As I mentioned, Puka Nacua, I think, does seem like he's going to keep coming down here. I don't expect him to hold in the top 10 over the course of a year. He is down to 11.8 targets per game, but a lot of that is reflecting the earlier haul that he had without Cooper Kupp. EPA-wise, looking pretty good, 0.34 EPA per target. The red zone usage, though, is pretty tough for him. 0.5 red zone targets per game, 0.2 red zone rushes per game. So some usage there, but not as much as an elite receiver. Don't expect him, again, to hold in this top 10 because of stuff like that. Also not getting deep targets very much, 0.8 deep targets per game, which basically puts him only ahead of Adam Thielen in this top 10. So Puka's a fine player. He's just more of, again, the Robert Woods to Cooper Kupp as what that's going to be over the course of time. And I do think Puka can have some spike weeks, but he right now, like if you sold high in him, I think that was the right move. For Puka, just going to keep coming down because Kupp is a target earner. If Kupp goes back out, though, Puka is going to be even better with the run that he has because he's going to learn more over the course of this time. He now knows different roles, so he can move around the field. That's the thing for Puka that'll really benefit if Kupp goes back out. But for right now, he's kind of like fancy contingent value is how I'd view Puka Nacua. Adam Thielen coming in at number 8. Thielen crushing it right now, 0.59 EPA per target playing out of the slot. I do think Thomas Brown, the OC, coming in with a Rams pedigree, maybe some amount of risk, though. The worst fucking outcome would be if Adam Thielen now becomes Rams Cooper Kupp in this offense, which you could make the case he's already kind of there. But if he gets even more targets, I guess there is a world where Thielen can hit a higher ceiling. As an offseason non-Thielen believer, I'm certainly hoping that this works out poorly for Thielen and this new OC goes, yeah, we should probably target DJ Chark more downfield. We should get Terrace Marshall involved. We should get Mingo some of the touches that are going to Thielen. That's what I'm hoping to see. But the most likely outcome does feel like Thielen just keeps getting fed. I don't expect him to be as efficient. The touchdown's been there for a little bit too much for him, I think. But getting 1.2 red zone targets per game, 0.2. Adam Thielen has gotten a red zone rush this year. So kudos to him. He's also got a 2.1 EPA on his deep targets, which is 0.3 per game. So Thielen's usage, I think the most fragile this guy's in the top 10 besides Puka. Thielen, though, he's playing out of his mind. How long can it last? I don't know. But you just got to, I guess, take the fucking lumps at this point for not believing in Adam Thielen. Davante Adams, we talked about with the Josh Jacobs stuff. Really do think that he needs to show off big time in this upcoming week. He's down to a 0.4 EPA per target, which is still really good. 9.8 targets per game. 2.3 red zone targets per game is actually the most of any receiver that I'm seeing on this entire screen. So it might be the most overall of any receiver in football. That's really good for him. 1.2 deep targets per game. Not that good for him, but still okay. He hasn't a lot with that. 0.15 EPA per deep target for Davante Adams. I need to see the breakout game for Adams. I think if Adams doesn't get there this week, I would sell immediately on him. Unless he's going to get traded, I guess, would be the one way he can salvage. But he gave that quote about not wanting to be out there unless the team was competing for something. Since then, it has been half-assed effort after half-assed effort after half-assed effort. It's been Jimmy looking for Jacoby Myers a lot more. I have a lot of issues with how I've seen Adams play, and I'm not like the biggest tape bro guy. I'll let the data do the talking for the most part, but the data has also shown him coming down like this every single week. That's not a great thing for Davante Adams. So if he doesn't do it against the Bears, I don't think he's going to do it again in a Raiders uniform. Is basically the way that I see that. Let's see. Wide receivers having to play running back for Detroit. Does that help Amon-Ra St. Brown? It does help a little bit if the carries just get less efficient overall, but the last time we saw Montgomery not play, we did see Jahmyr Gibbs get just shy of 20 touches, so I don't think it changes things too much. Probably increases the red zone equity, be the best thing that I would say for those guys, for Amon-Ra St. Brown, for Sam Laporta. That would be the biggest impact because Montgomery just took so much red zone usage away. but I think it doesn't probably affect the overall ecosystem that much. Besides just, they might rely on the run game a little bit more, but they want to run that football. Like, they definitely want to keep it out of Goff's hands, keep things clean for him as best they can as well. So I think they're still going to be pretty pot committed to running the football. But to close out Davante Adams, though, again, like, this is the week. Like, this is really the week for him. If it goes great, I'm backing on Adams every week. If this goes poorly, I think that this is a really bad sign for the Raiders' career of Davante Adams. Closing us out here is Amon-Ra St. Brown, 0.28 EPA per target, 10.2 targets per game. Where he's struggling is that the targets are not that deep. 7.2 air yards per target will be the lowest amongst the top 30 receivers here in SPAGS score. So the next closest one is Josh Downs at 6.5. So that sort of gives you some context to Amon-Ra St. Brown's usage. He's just getting used kind of like a slotty guy without a lot of upside there. But the crush of targets, his own skill set is very good. He's avoiding tackles at a 13% clip on his pass plays. So that's pretty okay too. A little mobility. 1.2 red zone targets per game is not the best, though we can maybe give him some cover because he was hurt for parts of the season too. But Amon-Ra, we know the ceiling is there. He showed it this past week. He is a guy to me that I think looks pretty good, more reliable than a DJ Moore for sure, especially with Moore having to deal with the Tyson Bagent and stuff coming up. DJ Moore barely missed this list. He's at number 11, but I think it makes sense that he missed the list because it's just going to get worse for him as well. But Amon-Ra, to me, the one guy that can really make a big leap here. I think Adams can certainly make a leap as well, but I do think that Amon-Ra's ceiling is closer to this Chase Brown Diggs tier. I had said before the year that I thought Amon-Ra had an outside shot of being wide receiver 1. I think I'd have to throw that out the window now, but I think he is still in the hunt to be a top 5 receiver, which is pretty good relative to draft capital and all of that. And obviously, anytime you can get any top 5, top 10 receiver, like it's going to be pretty good because all these guys are crushing this year and have tangible ceilings. All right. Let's get in Jerry's ear about Adams. That would be interesting if he went to the Cowboys, but contractually, I don't think there's any way they could afford that. But certainly would be a nice spot. The biggest one would obviously be Adams to the Chiefs. He would put up 150 yards a game probably, and like would hurt Travis Kelce, but it would just be Adams and Kelce taking everything. And that would be the hugest win for him and for his owners or his managers, whatever phrasing we're supposed to use. But I think I still want to see him really play a little bit harder. I think I worry about him on this current configuration. All right, last one here. We got the tight ends. So let's quickly, once again, guys, hit that subscribe button down below. Hit the like button as well. Leave a comment if you're watching after the fact. Any questions, any guys you want to see. I'm also, after the video, I'm going to leave a pinned comment down below with a link to the full SPAGS rankings so you can see here. It's also going to include all the data I look at. Again, many of which comes from Sports Info Solutions, so check it out for yourself. But I'm going to drop that in the pinned comment down below so you can check out all the rankings, see where guys, if you're curious about anybody, go check that out. Let's go to the tight ends. To round us out here. Oh, there we go. The best tight end in football, Taylor Swift. Yeah, I'm as guilty of doing what the NFL does. I don't care. Let's put Taylor Swift in there. Why not? Let's get some, click it up. Click that like button. Got Taylor Swift on the screen. Travis Kelce, though, number 1 overall for all the obvious reasons. Great usage. A little bit less efficient than Mark Andrews, but still 9.2 intended touches per game, 1.8 inside the red zone, 0.4 inside the 5-yard line per game. It's just great usage for Kelce in an offense that needs anybody to catch a ball because they don't trust anybody they have at receiver to catch a ball. So that's pretty good. I think that for Travis Kelce, though, everything's working out for him this year. The usage, the relationship, the fucking publicity from the relationship, all playing very well for Travis Kelce. He's top tight end in football. Is he that much better than everybody else this year? Not yet. We do know he has that 30, 40 fantasy point ceiling. So if he puts up one of those games, he probably does justify his draft pick, even though it's kind of hard with all the wide receivers are so fucking good that I do think there was a little bit of a loss just taking Kelce overall in that first round. But he can lap the tight end position and make up for a lot of flaws in other areas if Travis Kelce puts up big games. So he's the most primed to put up big games, best offense, all that stuff. Thought Chiefs and Chargers first, but in division feels 0%. Sure. Oh shit, it's tight end Taylor. Yes, Taylor herself running the routes out there for Travis Kelce. And honestly, with the usage that Kelce gets, I think Taylor would probably be a top 5 tight end in football if she's got that Travis Kelce usage. But probably not as good of a targeter in her. I think we can agree. Mark Andrews, slightly more efficient than Travis Kelce, 0.38 EPA compared to 0.36 for Travis Kelce, but the usage not quite as good. Only 1 red zone target per game, only 6.8 targets per game compared to 9.2 for Kelce. Kelce's just on a tier of his own in terms of usage, but Andrews doing about as well as he can in a really not great run out for Lamar. Like we talked about Lamar earlier, he's not efficient passing right now. He's doing great because he's running the ball and he's still getting enough in the pass game. But if Lamar does positively regress, I'd expect Andrews to get even better as well. And he could probably get even closer to Kelce, even though it's hard to imagine him passing Kelce in terms of the pure volume metrics. TJ Hawkinson, number 3 here. Again, 7.8 targets per game. Good target share this past week with no Justin Jefferson out there. Hawkinson to me is just like the same thing as Kelsey and Andrews, but not quite as fun, not quite as explosive. 0.07 EPA per target, so substantially behind Andrews and Kelsey. He's just not as efficient. That efficiency should come down even more without Jefferson out there because you're just going to see more coverage shaded his way, Hawkinson's way. So that's something where I think for Hawkinson, the usage is good. He's a perfectly fine player. He needs to give you one of those 50-point games like he gave Detroit to really make him worth the draft capital. For right now, though, Hawkinson is solid. He's just a very clear number 3. And I think that I think Andrews is a very clear number 2. Like, this is not 1A, 1B, 1C. It's 1, 2, 3. And it's like a pronounced 1, 2, 3 from where I sit. Until because Sleeper won't make Fields out, so I can move him into the IR slot. Sorry to hear that. But yeah, Fields is not going to be an IR stint in length, so you're probably not going to get that one going your way. Sam Laporta here at number 4, getting less efficient by the week. Jared Goff also not taking deep shots. We have seen some of Sam Laporta's biggest games come when Jared Goff got that one deep shot to him downfield. So Sam Laporta, I think, maybe being a little bit underused, but still 7 targets per game, hard to ignore. 0.3 deep targets per game, also fine relative to tight end. He's basically net neutral with all the guys at tight end in terms of that. 1.5 EPA, though, on his deep targets. So fucking get this by the guy the ball downfield is what I would suggest for Sam Laporta. It's not what's happening, though. 0.7 red zone targets per game puts him, again, safely behind Kelsey, Andrews, Hawkinson. But for a rookie who got drafted where he did, like Laporta, I think, very worth this number 4 spot. You can see it moving around a little bit, I think, with Laporta, Waller, Ingram. Like, those guys, I think, are a little bit flatter than it may seem. But Laporta should hang in the top 10 this year, barring an injury. And I think would not be surprised at all to see him hang in closer to the top 5. He's in a great spot. I think he's playing really well. Just would like to see a more opportunity to have more potential spike weeks. But if he just gives you 5 to 15 any given week, like for tight end, that's enough to keep you more than competitive at the position throughout the year. A wag on the screen, and I thought he just appears. Where's Mathology? Yes. I mean, look, Mathology's got this big win a couple weeks ago, and now he's too big time to be hanging out here on Splash Play. But yes, Pillow Talk above expectation model, crushing for Travis Kelce this year. Darren Waller, better than he seems, 0.25 EPA per target, 6.8 targets per game, 0.5 which are in the red zone. He's also getting 0.7 deep targets per game. Hasn't connected on one of them yet, but none of them have been catchable, so that's pretty tough for him. For Darren Waller, the usage is okay. I think it would look better for him if Daniel Jones is out for a little bit longer with his neck issue. I thought the offense looked a lot better with Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod himself played perfectly okay in that game. Obviously, gave him a shot to win it, which is more than you can ask. But I think for them, it's just Daniel Jones being bad is killing everything. Daniel Jones being unable to handle the 40% plus pressure rate the Giants are giving up. That's a big part of the issue as well. But for Waller, the usage is there. So someday it'll work out for him. Like when that game is, I don't know. Because Waller's actually had some good tight end matchups on paper and has not come through. But I think the usage for him is still good enough. Like, it's an ugly position, and that's an ugly number 5 overall player. But obviously that checks out. Evan Ingram, same thing as Waller for the most part, a little bit less efficient, 0.08 EPA per target. The thing that stands out, though, not a single red zone target on the year is not great. Like, I'd expect him to at least gotten 1 at this point, but it does feel like everything is flowing away from Evan Ingram. If defenses do key in a little bit more on Travis Etienne after the big game he had this week, you could see a guy get out there a little bit more like Evan Ingram and get out there and have some actual red zone usage. But with the lack of red zone usage, like, he'd probably be ahead of Waller if he had any red zone targets at all. But because he doesn't have any, he's not getting a lot of deep shots either. Ingram is just a guy right now at tight end getting a good amount of volume, but not running that well in terms of being heavily involved in potential scoring plays. Behind him is going to be Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet, I do expect to come down as well a little bit more. I think if anything, he might have a higher floor as it says on the screen with Tyson Bagent, just because of the fact that rookie and experienced players QB do often target tight end a little bit more as a safety blankie. Cole Kmet, though, has had his biggest ceiling days when Justin Fields has been using him, getting him downfield, running around, getting him open in the red zone. Like, that's something that's been working well for Cole Kmet. Bagent can kind of do that, but I don't know that it's going to be the same relationship in the same situation. So Cole Kmet's perfectly fine as well, but I think he's more likely to come down a little bit here to tight end position. That guys are moving around a lot at tight end just because it takes one okay game to suddenly pop up at tight end because everybody's playing like shit at the position. So I think for Cole Kmet, wouldn't shock me to see him out of the top 10, and I guess it would shock me to see him move up this week with Tyson Bagent at QB. Let's see. The Giants are hard to watch this year. They certainly are. I think whenever teams just give up that much pressure, it's just like the QB has to be a miracle worker at that point. And Daniel Jones is not a miracle worker. And I think that's on the team a lot more than it is Daniel Jones. But like they're ruining Daniel Jones right now because they don't have anybody who can actually protect the pocket and keep it clean for him. And as a result, he's regressing, I think, heavily in terms of everything he does. Like he's not even running as well as he did last year because they just can't get him any sort of room to breathe. Logan Thomas still on this ranking here. You know, Logan Thomas, who saw a down game last week. When guys like Curtis Samuel, guys like Jahan Dotson go off, that's just going to chip away pretty heavily at Logan Thomas. But for tight end, he has the potential to give you spike weeks. Curtis Samuel's not going to put up 20 every week. Jahan Dotson's looked like shit this week, but his usage also sucks at the position. So for Logan Thomas, like you get how it happens, but he's a guy too, pretty fragile here at the 8th spot. Don't expect him to hold in here. Kyle Pitts at number 9, 0.06 EPA per target, 6.3 targets per game, tied for the tops at tight ends, 0.7 deep targets per game. So Kyle Pitts is underlying usage not that bad, 0.7 red zone targets per game. Worth pointing out that on this list, Jonnu Smith would be number 12 here. Jonnu Smith is the biggest issue for Kyle Pitts. If there were no Jonnu Smith, Kyle Pitts would probably be getting a lot more work overall, getting even more snaps, even more routes. So still, like, that's the biggest issue for Kyle Pitts. But the fact that he's in the top 10 at all, I think is a tremendous victory for people that want to see Kyle Pitts get back to something useful. He made a Millie Maker winning lineup this week. Like, things were looking okay for Kyle Pitts, but he's not going to get to Travis Kelce. He's not going to get to Mark Andrews. He's not going to get to Hawkinson, which was the hope for him as a prospect. But in this offense, there's just zero chance of it happening. Dalton Schultz makes the top 10 for the first time here since we've made it an actual number. 0.13 EPA per target, 5.7 targets per game, up to 1.2 red zone targets per game. Dalton Schultz getting more involved as the year goes on. I guess Tank Dell being out probably helped that a little bit this past week. But for Dalton Schultz, I think that it was always something that you'd expect him to be more involved. He was always out there for a good amount of snaps, always out there for a good amount of routes. But Nico Collins getting more work. You know, Robert Woods getting more work than Schultz has been getting. Tank getting more work than Schultz has been getting. But I think especially if you see the running backs be inefficient, Dameon Pierce in particular, but Devin Singletary getting more pass game work, if he's not great with that, that probably benefits Schultz the most. For right now, though, again, he's just a dude. I don't expect him to hold on to this top 10 spot. Really do expect guys like Musgrave, Michael Mayer to surge over the course of a season. Schultz, to me, I think is just an okay guy at a position where there's a lot of just okay guys who are going to give you 5 to 15 every week. And you know, whichever configuration gets there is the one that gets there. I think it's not a great position unless you have Kelce, Andrews, or Hawkinson. And even then, it's not great because you passed up a lot of great guys to take them. So pretty shitty situation. Stroud looks legit too, getting even more confident. I think it's positive for Schultz overall. Yeah, it's also too that like defenses are now have a month of tape saying we got to stop Nico Collins downfield. What do you do when you're selling out to stop Nico Collins downfield? You leave things open in the middle of the field where Dalton Schultz can feast a little bit more. So it's sort of the natural progression of football and how it goes, where Nico's already out of the top 10. I think he would have been a top 10 guy earlier in the year. That's something where it just kind of levels out because defenses adjust and figure out when you're putting things on tape, like how it's all going to go. Hard to play football when you're scared to get killed. That is very true for Daniel Jones and for any of us here. Betting and otherwise. There you go, guys. There's your SPAGS rankings here. Again, I'm going to drop the whole rankings in the pinned comment down below the second I finish this video. So check that out in a moment. Of course, make sure to go and subscribe to the channel. Please also hit the like button. Please leave a comment here. Of course, the SPAGS rankings, we got it down from a 2.5-hour marathon to a lean and mean 1 hour. That's part of my commitment here to the process on Splash Play, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. every day. Putting in the work here, putting in the process. Tomorrow's a showdown video, which was for sure a moneymaker on Monday. So we'll see if we can get back and do something good for the Jags game coming up tomorrow on Thursday Night Football. Follow me at Chris Spags. Follow the show at Splash Play Pod. And of course, if you have some good bets you want to get in, go check out probably.com. It's free to go and scroll through, find good bets in any game, mathematically profitable bets based upon finding the true probability for every bet on the top performing sports books around the world. That's what we do at Probably. It is my startup. It is all my sort of insane process that I do with everything when it's making Probably, but with a lot better tech behind it. So go check it out at probably.com. And I will see you guys tomorrow for the showdown video. So enjoy your days. Tell a friend about the SPAGS rankings, right? And of course, good luck. Bye.